All right. Good afternoon or morning, everybody, depending on what time zone you happen to exist in. I am thrilled to welcome you to our third e-chat on the future of teen library services. This conversation is coming out of YALSA's recently released call to action, and today we're going to be talking about community connections and facilitating educators. So I am Chris Shoemaker. I am YALSA's president-elect, and I'm going to be your moderator today. And I am thrilled to have with me Peter, Maureen, and I'm going to butcher your name so badly, K-Fai. And I was wondering if you could just give me a quick introduction from all of you. So Peter, let's start with you.
So, my name's Peter Kirschman. I currently a grad student at the Harvard Graduate School of Education, but for the last 5 years I've been working at the Science Museum of Minnesota. And a lot of my work there was working with libraries, doing creative technology workshops and planning them. And then for the last 2 years I worked with a group of teens called the Teen Tech Crew who taught workshops for peers and near peers on creative technology in St. Paul Public Libraries.
And Maureen?
Oh, hi, I'm Maureen Hartman. I coordinate youth services at the Hennepin County Library, which is Minneapolis and suburban Minneapolis, Minnesota. And I am a member of the YALSA board, and I was one of the co-authors of the call to action paper.
Wonderful. And K-Fai?
My name is K-Fai Steele. I work at the Free Library of Philadelphia, and I am a teen programming specialist there. I basically am running the Teen Maker program and a couple of other grants.
Wonderful. So to get the conversation started, I wanted to ask you all if you would talk about a time when you were working with teens and you were really able to help establish a connection between the teens that you were working with and a outside mentor or community program, and how that impacted some of your professional work. And I saw Maureen look up like she was thinking, but okay. Okay, fine.
So I run this initiative at the Free Library, and we call it the Maker John Initiative. But it's basically a maker initiative where we introduce kids to tools and technology through making like some sort of physical artifact. But I guess the interesting thing about it is not so much seeing the finished product that kids make, but kind of seeing their process as they're going along and figuring things out. And one thing that we talk about a lot as mentors, well, so I'm running a team of mentors, basically, and we're at 5 libraries in North Philadelphia, and we run every day after school programming. And we talk a lot about helping kids develop their resilience and teaching them that it's okay to fail and that their first go at something is probably not going to work out. But just teaching them like, okay, well, that's interesting, but, why don't you try this? Or, it's not turning on. We have to figure out why it's not turning on. So one thing that we talk a lot about is mentoring kids through that process and not so much giving them the answers, but kind of guiding them along as they're figuring things out. And I mean, certainly that involves a lot of developing a one-on-one relationship with the youth and like developing that, I guess it's almost like a mentorship relationship where it's not like, I am the librarian and I'm giving you information because you're coming to me with a problem. It's more like, you're trying to figure out this thing. You don't know what it really is going to look like. I don't know what it's really going to look like, but let's try to figure it out together. And it's really meeting the youth where they are that's been a really powerful thing for us to put ourselves in the position of like, I'm not the expert, but, and there are things that I need to learn and there are things this kid wants to learn too. And with cool things like new technology, like, making your own designs on a 3D printer. It's just so new that, I don't know how to do it yet, and the kid doesn't know how to do it yet. But I think that's one thing that the paper talks a lot about that I found particularly compelling was this idea of co-learning and taking yourself out of the role of being the expert and putting yourself at the same level as, we're learning together.
I almost think that part of everyday experience with librarians should be waking up, looking in the mirror, and going, "I am not the expert on everything," and see how well that helps shift our attitudes. But Peter or Maureen?
So I was thinking about, in working with Teen Tech Crew, who is this crew of 9 high schoolers who were going out, and they had 3 libraries that they were working at, and when we first started, it was a lot sort of ideas coming from me because I had this experience doing creative technology, and they needed to hit the ground running and start doing workshops. But once the summer came, the teams we started attending community events, not just in the libraries, and so sort of mini maker fairs and going to sort of other community organizing events really opened it up. And there was one artist in particular who had been at a couple of these events who one of the teens on the Teen Tech Crew really connected with, and she was doing this aerial photography, and she was willing to come into the libraries and do some workshops in our space, in the Createch space. And I think that was really one of the shifts that we had, was allowing the youth to make those connections. And I think, so in our case, we have these youth who are paid to teach these workshops, but I think a lot of libraries have sort of youth advisory committee boards and sort of like letting them go out and make those connections, because that's when it started to shift, where it was less like me as the facilitator, and it was really the Teen Tech Crew started to own those workshops. And I think those relationships have consisted and led to really interesting programming and partnerships with like a lot of really amazing artists throughout the Twin Cities.
Outstanding.
I don't have much to add to that because I'm not doing direct public service right now, but I'm thinking a little bit about an experience I had some time ago. I won't date myself, but outside of Boston, when I was working at the Watertown Free Public Library, and that was one of my first experiences with, well, I was a very new librarian, but there were a lot of young people there after school, and they weren't there for the books on the shelves. And so that was one of my first experiences in working with young people. I remember there was, excuse me, there was one girl that was there almost every day, and through the work that we all do, naturally getting to know her in particular, I discovered that she was thinking about getting involved in her theater at her high school, and she was kind of reluctant to do that. And so I'm just trying to think of, like, you know, that mentoring relationship doesn't have to always be with these new spaces and our new technology, but in many ways that's work that all of us have always been doing to connect. I can give you some, at that time I could give you some books, I could kind of come up with some websites, but a better connection for her was actually to the theater teacher at the high school, which is what I ended up doing. So it's just a different example.
Wonderful. I think that is a really important point, Maureen, about the connections and the ways we relate and how we're looking at what library service should be. It's not always about it's not about how we connect through technology or always building on emerging trends, but how we change all aspects of relating and connecting with our teen audiences in the library. So obviously, with the future of teens in libraries and the report, one of the big pieces of that is the overall the shift of the role of libraries and librarians to our teen audiences. And I was curious about how you initially reacted to that the first time you read it or saw it come across your Twitter feed or your blog. So what were your initial reactions when you saw what YALSA was proposing or suggesting?
So part of my role with the Teen Tech Crew was working with the librarians who the Teen Tech Crew were interacting with in the libraries. And I saw sort of echoes of that. So when we were first starting to have these meetings with all the librarians they were working with, there was a sort of a brainstorming process of what sort of things did this group of librarians and myself want to learn or focus our time on. And I was expecting it to be all of that technology, and this sort of goes to the point that Maureen and Chris, you were just saying, that it's not about the digital technology. And I pulled up today when I was looking at the report again, I pulled up that brainstorming list, and like the biggest groups were about teamwork and youth development and relationship building, and then also group management with the public and trying to get buy-in about these programs and connecting with the larger community outside of the library. And so that really resonated for me when I was looking through, and it's focusing on that, like you just said, like the not being the expert all the time, that was exactly what came up, is like, how do you manage these groups and build these relationships? And the technology really took a back seat even when we were talking about it.
Yeah, I totally agree. But I guess one thing that I had thought about when I read this, so, I feel like even in the beginning it talks about, there's all this new technology, and how are we going to integrate this with teen services and teen programming? But despite, a lot of conversation about technology, there wasn't much there about, like, specifically, well, how can we use technology to leverage learning, or how can we take advantage of this new amazing tool so that, you can point out pathways for a kid who might be interested in something like fashion design or something like that. But I think that technology should be certainly talked about a lot, especially with libraries, because I feel that many librarians are they're either like really into technology, and it's in a way that's almost inaccessible to youth. Like they might be really into Arduino, they might be really into robotics, and they might not realize, well, that might not be the best way to reach non-dominant youth, or that might not be the most inclusive, but you have to approach it from that way. But I think there are a lot of technophobes in libraries generally, or people who don't want to learn something new because they're like, well, I have my job, it is what it is, I don't want to have to put any extra time into learning something like e-textiles or Arduino or something like that, or I don't want to have to learn how to use a 3D printer. We'll buy it, but then it just becomes this very expensive conversation piece that no one really knows how to use. So almost I would argue, on top of all the things, certainly positive youth development and mentoring kids and meeting them where they are and helping them to articulate their interests. But on top of that, it's really about, like, one thing that I kept on thinking about was, it was something on, actually I wrote it down, it was on page 11, Dave Lanke's talked about the knowledge gap. So there's like the digital divide. It's the people who don't have access to things like broadband internet, or they don't have computers. That's something we certainly see a lot in Philadelphia. But it's also like, well, once you have the computer, why would you want to take a MOOC, or why would you want to use YouTube to learn something? It's like, we kind of need to figure out, like, how can you use new technology in a way that's meaningful to you, that's meaningful to teens, and have librarians themselves do that, but also be able to serve as like role models for kids, like, oh, well, here's how you actually can really use Google, or here's how you can use YouTube to figure things out.
An outstanding point that I think we tend to forget about when we bring our passions and our interests into the library and try and make them into teen programs, we tend to be operating on a much higher skill level in some cases than our teens, and the teaching abilities and ability to connect. Because if you're programming, Arduino to, and obviously I know nothing of computer programming, but if you're programming it to, control your whole house, and the teens in your library are like, well, what's the circuit do, and how do I make a line of code? It doesn't matter how passionate they are about it. That disconnect between skill levels is important to consider as well.
Right,
and Maureen?
And they're not even going to get it in the beginning anyway, right?
Yeah. Maureen?
Oh, I think that transitioning library staff, or supporting library staff in moving from an expert role to a facilitator, is one of the hardest things that we're going to do. It's a really different approach for staff, and I would say that rather than, I think there's a variety of ways to do it. I mean, one is to continue to add new folks to the mix so that we have new ideas and new people that have used technology. But that's not the only answer. The other answer is, how do we continue to support the staff that we have here in the building and their background, and support them in trying things, right? And so, if you don't get to play around with technology, or you don't feel that you can make a mistake or fail, then that's going to be really difficult for you to support young people in doing that too. And I think, to me, it really resonates, but I like to be a know-it-all too. So that's hard, right? I have to kind of keep that in the front of my mind. Even now, when I told the story about the teenager in Watertown, what I should have done was empowered her to connect to the drama teacher. But no, instead I was like, I'll connect for you. So, I think it's all like kind of a constant evolution for us. And I would say that it's not, that there's, baby steps along the way.
To your staff, the idea of staff development and the skills that we need to teach, how would you change professional development in order to communicate that message that it's okay to fail? And what other skills and teaching moments do we need to have for library staff of all points in graduation, of all levels of experience, in order to shift their approach to being a community collaborator and a co-learner instead of the expert or the information destination? That's kind of a big question, so I can repeat it a couple of times.
No, it's good. So yeah, one thing that we did in Philly is we're going through it's basically a large organizational redesign. And we have 54 branches all across the city, but in a way to kind of centralize and kind of rethink how we serve different geographies, where we've created clusters. So the first one, the pilot one, is the North Philadelphia cluster, and that's the one I primarily work with. And we did, they have a monthly meeting where they have staff members from librarians to security guards. They all come together at one branch just for a meeting. And so we did a professional development session that was kind of based around the idea of so we don't really call it a maker fair, because I think that is branded. We call it more of like a maker celebration. So basically it's like, 6 or 7 tables that are set up with creative activities, and it usually has some sort of technology spin. But we just, we let people just kind of cruise around and have conversations. And one thing that was actually mentioned in the paper is this notion of homago. So that was kind of coined by Mimi Ito at UC Irvine. It stands for hang out, mess around, and geek out. And I see you all like nodding. Yeah, you know what it is. But we wanted staff to be able to participate in the programming that we're doing for youth, so that they would be able to understand it, and then they would get a chance to check it out as well. And so it was really cool. A lot of people were able to share kind of what their own personal interests and passions were, and a lot of people got to, you're just playing with each other. It was really low stress, like low barrier projects. And it was great because afterwards we had a couple of security guards who were watching this one green screen session that kids were doing. They got in, they're like, well, we're on break right now, can we participate? And then they jumped in, which was awesome because, they would normally maybe be a barrier to that youth participation or that youth interaction with the library, but now that they understood what was going on because they had participated in the shop, it just gets their buy-in a bit more. And maybe they're like, well, I used to be interested in photography, or I'm kind of interested in like robotics or something, or I would like to learn more. So just giving them a little bit of exposure to whatever programming you're doing or however you're rethinking teen programming designs.
I think along the same lines. Oh, I see mouse moving, but I can't hear words, so I'm not sure. Can you all hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Along the same lines with the Createch Labs, which were St. Paul's regular teen technology spaces, so each library had a 2 or 3 hour block every week. The librarians all came together for these meetings every other week. And it seemed, this is coming from an outside of library perspective, like just having that hour together every other week to talk. And sometimes it was doing exactly what K-Fai was saying, where like I would just bring like some little bits or like some circuitry thing and say like, let's just play with this and hang out. But the first half hour of the meeting was always just like, we need to get snacks if this is going to work, or this is what's happening at my site, or we're trying to do resume training and teen programming in the same room at the same time. How are you doing it over there so that we can work on it over here? Or like, are you letting 9-year-olds in because there's these 9-year-olds who give me these puppy dog eyes and I don't want to turn them away, but the teens do say to turn it away. So like just providing those spaces where they could have those conversations, like they weren't even facilitated, like we would step back and that was happening, and I think that that was building the capacity of those folks to deal and think about practice.
I just want to affirm what you all said. I mean, it's being able to get a hands-on opportunity to do that, and also some clear leadership and vision around this is your changing role, and acknowledge that people are that's a role that people will continue to grow in. And I would also say that you can still be an expert and be a librarian. It's just that you're an expert in different things. You're an expert facilitator. You're an expert youth development worker. So you still have this deep expertise, and you can do all the research on that you would like. It's just a different way of providing the answer. And I think we have still lots of ways to talk about that that helps folks understand it.
Jumping off on Maureen's point, when there are experts and when you don't have the option to identify one, how can you work within your community to best identify the experts that will work for your audience or work for your team?
I think you have to get out there, and you have to start meeting people. And when you meet people, you can think about the kinds of questions to ask them. And they, in my experience, probably don't know the many things that the library is doing. And your conversation will start there. And then you'll tell them. And then they'll talk about something that they do, or something that they're passionate about, or some knowledge that they have. And that's a really good in for folks. It's sometimes I think in libraries we're so adamant to tell our entire story that we, give like a 20-minute explanation of all the many, many, many things we do. But what if you started by focusing on folks' interests and then built from there, and think about what that person can give to the young people that are in your building?
Yeah, another model that we're working with at the Free Library is sort of this artist in residence model. And so basically we bring in someone who is an expert, say in like performance or something like that, or e-textiles, and we have them there at the branch 2 days a week for 4 weeks. And that way they get the title of like, oh, well, I was an artist in residence at the Free Library of Philadelphia, or I was a writer in residence at the Free Library, and kind of like they're given this residency, they're given like a small space to work at, but they are required to share their practice with the youth that are in the space and to do a project with them. So I think that that's an interesting way too to bring kind of like fresh programming and fresh blood and perspective into the library. And it also gives the library, people find out like, oh, the library is doing this cool thing where, I'm an artist or I'm a performer, and I might get this opportunity to work with youth and be able to add this line to my CV.
Yeah.
Okay. Didn't want to jump over you if you wanted to add something else in. Peter, your earlier point mentioned this a little bit, but with teen programs and teen services, one of the big pieces of the YALSA report is the need to transition the current service model from the assumption that teens are only the teen librarian's problem, and that teens should stay in the teen room if your library happens to have one. How can libraries and how can we work across our environments to bring everybody on board to reaffirm that everyone serves teens in the library, not just the person who happens to have teen in front of their title.
Well, if I knew the perfect answer to that, I would have a different job. But I mean, but think about it's not perfect, right? I mean, you need the strong leadership that articulates that this is everyone's role. You need the training, the opportunity for staff to see themselves in that new role. This is a new role. And you also need teen librarians to be willing to give up some of that. And I think that those are all part of it. So as our service changes, what does that mean for us for me, if I'm a teen librarian, how does my role perhaps start to shift from expert to facilitator in the exact same way? So you're facilitating other staff in becoming more expertise, gain more expertise, and become more able to talk with young people instead of having all of that directed back to you. And so I think that's a big change for us as well.
You mentioned
one of the things.
Sort of. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Peter.
Oh, sorry. It's a little glitchy, so I think my internet's not great. But one of the things that was happening in St. Paul, just when people were going on vacation or stepping out, is that other staff were being brought in to hang out at those Createch lab spaces. And I think that we saw there were changes in how teens were being interacted with just when another staff member was invited into the space to help co-lead or hang out and told just like, we're going to turn on the stereo, this is what it looks like, and we're going to do these activities and get comfortable in that space.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy. Maureen, it's what you were saying, just like changing your leadership, or that's a huge thing. Like having someone say like, yeah, this is how we're going to treat teens now. And I guess I'm reminded of this idea of like building literacy for a child. In the community, everyone should be focused on helping this kid learn to read, right? It's not just his parents. It's the library, it's his school, it's his family, it's his neighbors, should all be supporting this kid as they're learning how to read. And I see no reason why it shouldn't be the same focus with teens. We're pointing them towards, a myriad of goals, like you want to be ready for college, or you want to be ready to be a digital citizen, you want to be ready to be like a citizen in your city, right? And like identifying like, well, everyone is responsible for that. And something that I talk about to a lot of people is like, we really think that teens are going to be the new preschool in terms of like library support. The way that preschool was 20 years ago, it's like teens are the new focus because it's this demographic that's been really underrepresented and really underserved in libraries, and it's a big gap. And as long as we can figure out ways, but it is a huge uphill battle to get all the silos in your library to agree to work together to support teens, your library administration and executive staff to agree, and everyone who's on the floor, like the security guards, the LA2s, the librarians, to be on board with it as well. And to not be scared of teens. I find that that's like one of the big things, is that people just don't really want to interact with teens. When they see a group of teens hanging out in one space, the first thing they think is, okay, well, what's going on? And I should probably make this stop, whatever it is. So I think it's like, dispelling a lot of myths, and I think it is a lot of professional development.
Everyone sort of brought up that issue that a lot of teen librarians face is they're either in a silo of youth services and separated away, or they're a relatively non-powerful position on the org chart or in the hierarchy of management. What key messages do we need to get to them so that they can then go back to their administrators and their youth service managers and really push for this shift in library service, to push for the opportunity to go out into the community and find community partners and the time to build those community connections, rather than, oh, you're on the desk for 5 hours because we need you, school visits aren't important. What messages do we need to give them so that they can do all this new shifted work?
Well, I suppose it's one of those things where you can't just go to your supervisor and be like, I need 3 hours for outreach, or like, I need to do this. It seems like one technique, and I'm not saying this is the correct way to do it, would be to, do your own research, or be like, hey, I did this MOOC, or I watched this amazing YALSA webinar, or I participated in this online class or something like that, and I really think that this might be effective, or I've been like playing with e-textiles a lot on my own. I think this could be a really cool project. I'd like to be able to pull this person from this university to come and speak about it, or collaborate on this project with the Science Museum or something. I feel like you have to kind of bring something that your supervisor, that executive staff is going to identify as being valuable, and then they'd be like, okay, well, I'll give you the time to do that. But it seems like you're going to have to start doing a little bit of legwork on your own. Unfortunately, because this stuff is, it's so new and it's such a huge change that, and I feel like, some librarians maybe aren't so excited about that, like having to like pursue this stuff on their own, or, I've talked to a couple of librarians, and it's kind of like, well, figure out what you're passionate about or what you're interested in, and then go from there, because you're going to be putting the time into it anyway, so you might as well take what you'd be learning after work and see if you can apply it to a program or a partnership. Is that kind of pessimistic?
I think it's good.
Go ahead, Chris.
Maureen and I both incredibly polite, pausing. That's a really good point. It's sort of that push from always looking for passive opportunities and passive programs and passive partnerships into a really proactive one, and that requires a shift in our thinking and our attitudes and the way that we work. So definitely a good point. Maureen?
And so what I was going to say is, let's not forget the reality out there in many, many libraries. I know many of mine and in my system. We are asking staff to do a tremendous number of things, including work the desk, including, do story times, including do this, more forward-thinking work with teens. And unless the staffing and building changes, I mean, that's real. I mean, if I'm not necessarily saying that the answer is to like get a whole bunch more librarians, but to support staff in changing what their work looks like in the building. So, as you, for example, sitting at the desk, waiting for people to come to you, what is the rate of those reference questions? What are the type of those questions? And is there another place, that you can give up that and do something else? And that is not magical, and that is hard, and that isn't something that a teen librarian can do on their own. They can't just sit in a building and go like, what, I don't think I'm going to be on the desk anymore. That's the hard, sustained work I think that staff need all of our help with in changing that. So what happens if people are waiting for 20 minutes to get a reference question? Some of us are very uncomfortable with that. Some are like, who cares, whatever. And and if your system is on the, still trying to figure that out, it can be very difficult and very stressful to try to think about this future exciting world when you're kind of just trying to get through the day. So I think we have to be a little bit patient, but also help staff in asking some questions so that they can identify how they might give up something that they're currently doing to do this new work.
Definitely. It's turning that critical literacy lens back in on ourselves and evaluating the work that we do and how it's connected to all the other pieces of service. And then Peter, did you have a comment? I didn't want to jump. Okay.
No, the only thing I would say is that YALSA has that white paper, and I think that sort of lays out the argument about 21st century skills and building those critical skills really well. So maybe that's a place to start. Although everyone in the room has probably already read that. Hopefully.
Can I just say one more thing too about that? Patrons demand a lot of us. They ask us for a lot of things, and so I think it's some conversations to have with ourselves and with our colleagues and everything about there's so much that we could be doing. Where strategically is the best place to focus? for my library or for my system, and what does that mean we'll have to give up as a result? And those are difficult questions.
Librarians tend not to like to give very many things up, whether it's reference collections or activities that we're doing or things that the library has always done. If you can put that modifier on it, it tends to stay around sometimes a lot longer than it should.
And sometimes folks in leadership pick out things to change that are not the things you would have picked, and so then you have some decisions to make for yourself around, yes, things are supposed to change and I'm supposed to give up something, but not that thing. Why did you pick that thing? So I mean, in the best case scenario, staff are able to pick out some of those things, but realistically, you don't get to pick all the things out that you get to stop doing.
For a brand new librarian. Oh no, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, another thing that isn't really mentioned in the report, but I think is worth talking about is bringing people into the library who aren't librarians. Like, not just talking about like, well, how are we going to train all of our staff? It's like, I guess, like, what about bringing in people who are from the community into the library on a staff, in some sort of staff facet, to maybe lead programs that youth might be excited about that librarians couldn't otherwise provide. Like, say that the kids at your branch are really into music production, but librarians can teach that. It's like bringing someone in who will be like in a mentor position, much like the Chicago Public Library has done, and many of the other like Learning Lab sites have done, bringing on mentors specifically to work with youth, as opposed to the librarian being the one who's doing, who's the practitioner, who's the one who's actually working with kids. I think that could be incredibly valuable. It's a little scary, I suppose, if librarians start thinking about that, and it's like, especially teen librarians, like, okay, so it's inviting people in to kind of take over my job, or I don't want to be replaced by a bunch of artists. But I think it's really valuable to bring in people like that into the library, because it's a pretty transformative relationship both for the library and for that artist. And it makes it kind of, it designates the library as a place where new creative things are happening. And I like it because it's, the library is a public place. It's in your neighborhood. And if you give artists a chance, or writers or poets a chance to be kind of like in these mentor positions, I think that's extremely valuable.
Well, I think along with that, it's not necessarily...
And one other thing that we've actually done, we've worked with... It's placing, exactly.
Oh.
Another thing that we've done is work with local universities and colleges.
Go ahead. K-Fai.
Is this good? Is this just... No. All right.
Okay, so if you're all done, go ahead, Peter.
I say to what K-Fai was talking about earlier, that it's not replacing the work of that teen librarian, because it's really all about the relationships. And so if you're making those connections to those artists, like, you're the face who's in the library every day, and you're the person who those teens are connecting with, and you're going to be able to make those connections for them. Sorry if that was all already said.
No. So for our brand new librarians who are just getting started, and maybe aren't in large areas like, in larger cities that have all the sort of resources to draw from, like Philadelphia or New York or Chicago, where can libraries look to find those community connections, to do those initial outreach moments and those builds, what are some of the key pieces that they should be looking for?
I mean, if you're in library school, chances are you have some sort of social network in library school, and you're going to have friends that are in like the town or the city that you're in, and you can't underestimate how much knowing someone socially will make you be like, well, this person is this really amazing songwriter, or this person is this really amazing, or something like that. Like we've had many of our mentors and artists come in through word of mouth. Even when we've had success when we've tried to reach people through like a formal ad, but it's really through kind of like interesting people that you've met, because that'll be more of a you just have a stronger relationship with them anyway. And if you're like, well, I really trust this person, and I think they'll do great work, I wouldn't underestimate your own social network in terms of being able to bring experts from the community in, and even like even online groups. And so like we're doing this creative learning MOOC. It's a Media Lab MOOC, like meeting people through that, or the Maker Ed initiative, going to like local maker fairs or meetups, or like sometimes hacker spaces have like events at bars, and you go and you meet up with people there, and then you kind of carry the conversation on. I found that a lot of social events lead to opportunities. I don't know how to say that in the most delicate way, like have a beer with someone, and then like bring see if you can make something cool happen.
That's almost a better tagline to the call to action report. But I definitely get more people reading it. Go ahead, Peter.
I was going to say, asking the youth if they're people in the community, artists or musicians in the community that they want to connect with, and then using your sort of institutional, like, I'm from the library and we have a space, like, would you want to come in and do that? Because then you don't have to know the connections, and then that's sort of instant buy-in from whatever that community of teens are who are already in the space, who might know who, they're in their own world. So
I think it's actually quite the same as how some of us have continued to find like performers or presenters or folks to lead workshops, and this is a different kind of experience. But many years ago, I'm making myself seem so old, but I'm not really that old. When we were trying to find somebody, when I was first aware of anime, and I worked in a different library system, we were trying to find somebody to help kids like learn how to draw manga. And so where do we go? Well, we started at the art school. So it's the same kind of thing, except at that point, we were asking him to come in and do a workshop at Thursday at 4 o'clock. And this is, depending on the needs of your system, maybe a little different. Maybe we're asking somebody to make a longer term commitment. But we can start where the people are that know the stuff they're interested in. I love Peter's comment. But also, where are the people in your community that care about young people? Because that's your common ground. Whether or not that's at the Y or who knows where that is, those are the folks that are going to continue to reach that network out to find more people.
Actually, a fantastic transition into my next question, which could be considered a chicken or egg question, but how do we build our connections with communities that we don't have connections with for teens who aren't in the libraries, for providing education opportunities for needs that we don't know about? How do we go about making sure that we're not just serving those in the library, but we're really able to bring in all parts of the community into our institutions?
I mean, certainly you can start, if you are starting from nothing, I would start with creating a youth design council or a youth advisory board, and working with them to get them to kind of talk about like, okay, so what are the things that you do in your neighborhood after school? Like, what are the resources there? What do most kids do in the library? Like, what do kids mostly do after school? and just get that conversation going. I think that'll be much more valuable than trying to, or it'll be faster than trying to penetrate something like the school system or make a huge like top level partnership. If you can get a few teens there to get them talking, and then be like, well, what kind of programs would you be interested in, and go from there. I think that's a good place to start. And then doing other things, like say you go to a meetup and you meet one teacher who's really into like anime or something like that. And they're like, well, I have some kids in my classroom that are really into anime, and be like, okay, well, maybe we should do something together and have some sort of anime night or something like that. But just anywhere you can move fast and start small, where you can take bite-sized chunks and make interesting things happen, as opposed to trying to make huge institutional partnerships. I think that's going to be more effective, and you won't feel defeated as fast.
I think a really small, like, upcoming thing, K-Fai just mentioned that creative learning class that the MIT Media Lab is putting on. And I know from talking to some of the folks organizing it that a big chunk of the second half of that is going to be helping make local connections. And so that might be a way, just in the next couple of months, that you might be able to meet people in your community that are doing similar work or interested in similar things and start connecting around programming.
I just love K-Fai's point on sort of managing expectations, dreaming big, and then building small. Because oftentimes, as youth advocates, our approach is we're going to change the world and make it better tomorrow. And then when tomorrow is not better, it can be really easy to fall into a burnout. We've touched a lot on teen interests and demand and what they want to do in the course of building strong community connections. And we pride ourselves on being in the know regarding teen culture, staying tuned in and following everything that they want to learn about and explore. So how can teen librarians make sure that desire to stay in the know informs their approach as education facilitators, and make sure that librarians are co-learning with their teens rather than being the traditional instructor or just being a passive adult presence in the room or in the environment?
I mean, I think one great place to begin is, well, the summer is coming up and everyone's doing summer programming right now, and team summer programming. Think of, do some research. If you're interested in crafting, see if you can find something on e-textiles and some sort of project that you might want to make collaboratively with kids over the summer. It's like you can think of a project that is somewhat doable, and then if you have a small budget to buy things like parts for it, but do some sort of project together where you're learning at the same time as them, but try to spend a little bit of time so that when it starts to fail, it's not going to be dropped. But I think allowing yourself to go into that place where you're not entirely sure what you're doing, it's a hard place to be at. It's a hard thing to be like, I'm not exactly sure what I'm doing with this coding project, or I don't know what exactly I'm doing with this little robotics kit. But instead of, think of one project that you want to do, and then get a group of teens and be like, okay, we're going to figure this out together. Here's the video on YouTube about it. This is what it's going to look like, but we need to figure out how to make it happen. And we have 4 weeks to do it.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I think in working in a museum and being one of the few people who was working with teens, I think I had to remember to take and put on that hat. So you started out saying we pride ourselves on being sort of the experts of teen culture, but approaching teens that way is not not the way to go. You know, like when I'm working with my other adult colleagues, I can be like, yeah, I'm down with the teens and this is what we need and this is how things go, and that's fine. But then when I'm working with the teens, it's just like being really humble and like finding those projects, like K-Fai is saying, of like show up and like let's put the YouTube video up on the projector and figure this out together, and asking and just meeting them where they're at. But then also putting that I know teens hat on when it's advantageous when working with other staff members.
That's such a good point, Peter, and I think our teen librarians have to do that kind of code shifting all the time. And you know, so like the case that you would need to make for something with leadership or administration is the total opposite of how you would talk about it with young people. And I think that that's a continuing education for all of us. So, you know, we have come, you know, it's like teens in some library system is like that thing that keeps getting passed around and someone's like, oh, I don't know, like the teen librarian will figure it out or Maureen will figure it out. And so you do, just as you were saying, Peter, you have to act in that role of advocate for teens, like that you know what they need because that's what they told you, but you can't go back and act like a know-it-all to them. I think that is such a good point. I had not thought about that before, if that's true.
One final question, I think, since we're approaching the end of our discussion time. Libraries tend to have really unique roles in the community. And I was wondering if you could share your thoughts on how libraries are able to leverage that position or that role in order to connect, to build those connections across communities, whether it's library audiences or communities of interest, and how we're able to reach across and serve the education and lifelong learning needs of teens especially, but of all the populations that we serve. So how are libraries able to leverage their unique roles to make some of these shifts happen?
Well, it's public. It's in almost every neighborhood in the city. It's free. It has this reputation of being a place for learning and a public place. I think all of those things really position the library really well. You know, and especially, you know, talking to my colleagues who are at museums, their challenging thing is that, you know, it's hard to get teens to come there every day after school. They're not going to do it. You have to pay admission. If a family wants to go to the museum, they got to pack up the car with the kids. They have to pay admission to get in. But the library, it's like, this is where kids are going to be after school anyway. This is where adults come to look for jobs. This is where other people are coming to bring their kids so they can take out books and do a story time. I think it's really beautifully positioned to become a place, but I think it's just a matter of figuring out the logistics in terms of like, well, exactly how are we going to support these teen learners and how can we do it in a way where the staff is happy, they don't feel overworked, the kids are really feeling the full benefit of it, where we're connecting with other partners. So it's a huge thing, but it's exciting to watch it all start to unfold and to watch people start taking action towards making it happen.
I think one really awesome thing to add on to all of those points is that because it has this history of being sort of like, it has this institutional history, when libraries can bring in like a spoken word artist or can bring in this tinkering with electronics, like it can connect with those teens who maybe don't feel like they're successful in schools or in more formal learning environments. And so libraries already have all of this sort of like cultural or educational cachet that it can spread on and say, this is a valuable learning experience and you can come here and this is learning and this is exploring and making new connections to new interests in a way that maybe a lot of other organizations couldn't do.
You can't say it better than that.
Well, thank you all so much for your time today and for participating in the chat. And for our audience, I hope that you will join us next Monday, March the 24th, I believe. Let me just confirm that. Yeah, March the 24th, when YALSA President Shannon Peterson will be leading a discussion on cultural competencies. So thank you, Peter, thank you, Maureen, and thank you, K-Fai, for setting some time aside today to talk about community connections and facilitating education in your communities. So have a great day and go forth and shift your library. Thank you all.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you.